are back with part 4 of Purim 2020, and we're reading the book of Esther, which is customary during the festival of Purim. So we're on chapter 6. On that night, the king's sleep was disturbed, and he ordered to bring the book of the records, the chronicles, and they were read before the king. And it was found written that Mordecai had reported about Bigthana and Teresh, 2 chamberlains of the king of the guards of the threshold, who had sought to lay a hand on King Ahasuerus. And the king said, "What honor and greatness was done to Mordecai on that account?" And the king's servants who ministered before him said, "Nothing was done for him." And the king said, "Who is in the court?" And Haman had come to the outside court of the king's house to petition the king to hang Mordecai on the gallows that he had prepared for him. And the king's servants said to him, "Behold, Haman is standing in the court." And the king said, "Let him enter." And Haman entered, and the king said to him, "What should be done to a man whom the king wishes to honor?" And Haman said to himself, actually, he thought it was him. Um, and Haman said to himself, "Whom would the king wish to honor more than me?" And Haman said to the king, "A man whom the king wishes to honor, let them bring the royal raiment that the king wore, and the horse that the king rode upon, and the royal crown should be placed on his head. And let the raiment and the horse be delivered into the hand of one of the king's most noble princes. Let them dress the man whom the king wishes to honor, and let them parade him on the horse in the city square, and announce before him, 'So shall be done to the man whom the king wishes to honor.'" And the king said to Haman, "Hurry, take the raiment and the horse as you have spoken, and do so to Mordecai the Jew, who sits in the king's gate. Let nothing fail of all that you have spoken." Well, that didn't please Haman too well, but anyway, Haman took the raiment and the horse, and he dressed Mordecai and paraded him in the city square, and announced before him, "So shall be done to the man whom the king wishes to honor." And Mordecai returned to the king's gate, and Haman rushed home, mourning and with his head covered. And Haman recounted to Zeresh his wife and to all his friends all that had befallen him, and his wise men. And Zeresh his wife said to him, "If Mordecai, before whom you have begun to fall, is of Jewish stock, you will not prevail against him, but you will surely fall before him." While they were still talking to him, the king's chamberlains arrived and hastened to bring Haman to the banquet that Esther had prepared. Chapter 7. So the king and Haman came to drink with Queen Esther. And the king said to Esther also on the second day during the wine feast, "What is your petition, Queen Esther? And it shall be given to you. And what is your request, even up to the half the kingdom? And it shall be granted." And Queen Esther replied and said, "If I have found favor in your eyes, O king, and if it pleases the king, may my life be given me in my petition, and my people in my request. For we have been sold, I and my people, to be destroyed, to be slain, and to perish. Now, had we been sold for slaves and bondswomen, I would have kept silent, for the adversary has no consideration for the king's loss." And King Ahasuerus said, and he said to Queen Esther, "Who is this, and where is he? Who dared to do this?" And Esther said, "An adversary, an enemy, this evil Haman." And Haman became terrified before the king and the queen. And the king arose in his fury from the wine feast to the orchard garden, and Haman stood to beg for his life of Queen Esther, for he saw that evil was determined against him by the king. Then the king returned from the orchard garden to the house of the wine feast, and Haman was falling on the couch upon which Esther was. And the king said, "Will you even force the queen with me in the house?" The word came out of the king's mouth, and they covered Haman's face. Then said Harbonah, one of the chamberlains before the king, "Also, behold, the gallows that Haman made for Mordecai, who spoke well for the king, standing in Haman's house, 50 cubits high." And the king said, "Hang him on it." And they hanged Haman on the gallows. that he had prepared for Mordecai, and the king's anger abated. Chapter 8. On that day, King Ahasuerus gave Queen Esther the house of Haman, the adversary of the Jews, and Mordecai came before the king because Esther had told him what he was to her. And the king took off his ring, which he had removed from Haman, and gave it to Mordecai. And Esther placed Mordecai in charge of the house of Haman. And Esther resumed speaking before the king, and she fell before his feet, and she wept, and beseeched him to avert the harm of Haman the Agagite, and his device that he had plotted against the Jews. Then the king extended the golden scepter to Esther, and Esther arose and stood before the king. And she said, if it pleases the king, and if I have found favor before him, and the matter is proper before the king, and I am good in his sight, let it be written to rescind the letters, the device of Haman the son of Hammedatha the Agagite, which he wrote to destroy the Jews who are in all the king's provinces. For how can I see the evil that will befall my people, and how can I see the destruction of my kindred? Then King Ahasuerus said to Queen Esther and to Mordecai the Jew, behold, the house of Haman I have given to Esther, and they have hanged him on the gallows because he laid a hand on the Jews. And you write about the Jews as you see fit in the name of the king, and seal it with the king's ring. For a writ that it is written in the name of the king and sealed with the king's ring cannot be rescinded. So in other words, when that was sealed, he could not rescind that edict. And the king's scribes were summoned at that time in the 3rd month, that is the month of Sivan, on the 23rd day thereof. And it is written according to all that Mordecai commanded to the Jews and to the satraps and the governors and the princes of the provinces from Hodu to Cush, 127 provinces, every province according to its script, and every nationality according to its tongue, and to the Jews according to their script, and according to their tongue. And he wrote in the name of King Ahasuerus, and sealed it with the king's ring. And he sent letters by the couriers on horseback, the riders, the king's steeds, the camels, bred of the dromedaries, that the king had given to the Jews which are in every city the right to assemble, to protect themselves, to destroy, to slay, and to cause to perish the entire host of every people and province that oppressed them, small children and women, and to take their spoils for plunder. So he gave them permission to defend themselves, and helped with that. In one day, in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus, on the 13th of the 12th month, which is the month of Adar, the copy of the writ was that an edict be given in every province, published before all the peoples, and that the Jews be ready for that day to avenge themselves upon their enemies. The couriers, those who ride the king's steeds, the camels, went out hastened and pressed the king's order. An edict was given to Shushan, the capital. And Mordecai left the king's presence with a royal raiment, blue and white, and a huge golden crown, and a wrap of linen and purple. And the city of Shushan shouted and rejoiced. The Jews had light and joy and gladness and honor, and in every province and in every city, wherever the king's order and his edict reached, there was joy and gladness for the Jews, a banquet and a festive day. And many of the peoples of the land became Jews, because the fear of the Jews was upon them. Chapter 9. And in the 12th month, which is the month of Adar, on the 13th day thereof, when the king's order and his edict drew near to be put into execution, on the day that the Jews' enemies looked forward to ruling over them, it was reversed. The Jews should rule over their enemies. The Jews assembled in their cities and all the provinces of King Ahasuerus to lay hand on those who sought to harm them, and no one stood up before them, for their fear had fallen upon all the peoples. And all the princes of the provinces, and the satraps, and the governors, and those that conduct the king's affairs, elevated the Jews, for the fear of Mordecai fell on them. For Mordecai was great in the king's house, and his fame went forth throughout all the provinces, for the man Mordecai waxed greater and greater. And the Jews smote all their enemies with the stroke of the sword and with the slaying and destruction, and they did to their enemies as they wished. And in Shushan, the capital, the Jews slew and destroyed 500 men. And Parshandatha, and Dalphin, and Aspatha, and Poratha, and Adalia, and Aridatha, and Parmatha, and Arasai, and Aradai, and Bazatha, the 10 sons of Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the adversary of the Jews, they slew. But on the spoil they did not lay their hands. On that day the number of those slain in Shushan, the capital, came before the king. And the king said to Queen Esther, in Shushan, the capital, the Jews slew and destroyed 500 men, and the 10 sons of Haman, and the rest of the king's provinces, what they have done. Now, what is your petition? It shall be granted you. And what is your request? And it shall be done. And Esther said, if it please the king, let tomorrow too be granted to the Jews to do as today's decree, and let them hang Haman's 10 sons, on the gallows. Now the king ordered that it be done so, and a decree was given in Shushan, and they hanged Haman's 10 sons. Now the Jews who were in Shushan assembled on the 14th day of Adar as well, and they slew in Shushan 300 men, but upon the spoils they did not lay their hands. And the rest of the Jews who were in the king's provinces assembled and protected themselves, and had rest from their enemies, and slew their foes 75,000. But upon the spoil they did not lay their hands. Hands on the 13th of the month of Adar. And they rested on the 14th thereof, and made it a day of feasting and joy. And the Jews who were in Shushan assembled on the 13th thereof, and on the 14th thereof, and rested on the 15th thereof, and made it a day of feasting and joy. Therefore the Jewish villagers who live in open towns make the 14th day of the month of Adar a day of joy and feasting, and a festive day, and of sending portions to one another. And Mordecai inscribed these things, and sent letters to all the Jews who were in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus, um, both near and far, to enjoin them to make the 14th day of the month of Adar, and the 15th day thereof every year, as the days when the Jews rested from their enemies, and the month that was reversed for them from grief to joy, and from mourning to a festive day, to make them days of feasting and joy, and sending portions one to another, and gifts to the poor. And the Jews took upon themselves what they had commenced to do, and what Mordecai had written to them. For Haman, the son of Hammedatha the Agagite, the adversary of all the Jews, had devised to destroy the Jews, and he cast that P-U-R, that is the lot, to terrify them and destroy them. And when she came before the king, he commanded through letters that his evil device that he had devised against the Jews return upon his own head, and to destroy him and his sons on the gallows. Therefore they called these days Purim, after the name Pur. Therefore, because of all the words of this letter, and what they saw concerning this matter, and what happened to them, the Jews ordained and looked upon themselves, and upon their seed, and upon all those who joined them, that it is not to be revoked, to make these 2 days according to their script, and according to their appointed time every year. And these days shall be remembered and celebrated throughout every generation, and every family, every province, and every city. And these days of Purim shall not be revoked from amidst the Jews, and their memory shall not cease from their seed. Now Queen Esther, the daughter of Abihail, and that is spelled Abihail, and Mordecai the Jew wrote down all the acts of power to confirm the second Purim letter, and he sent letters to all the Jews to 127 provinces, the realm of Ahasuerus, words of peace and truth to confirm these days of Purim in their appointed times, as Mordecai the Jew and Esther the queen had enjoined them, and as they had ordained for themselves and for their seed the matter of the fast and their cry. Now Esther's order confirmed these matters of Purim, and it was inscribed in the book. Chapter 10. And King Ahasuerus imposed a tribute on the land and on the isles of the sea, and all the acts of his power and his might, and the full account of Mordecai's greatness, how the king advanced him, and recorded in the book of the Chronicles of Kings of Media and Persia. And pause a minute, I'm losing my voice here. For Mordecai the Jew was a viceroy to King Ahasuerus, and great among the Jews, and accepted by most of his brethren, seeking the good of his people, and speaking peace, shalom, to all their seed. Now, after reading this, there is another blessing that is usually said, and it's, "Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who wages our battles, defends our rights, avenges the wrong done to us, punishes our oppressors in behalf, and brings retribution upon all our mortal enemies. Blessed are you, Lord, who exacts payment in behalf of his people Israel from all their oppressors, God who delivers. Amen." And the rose of Jacob thrilled with joy and exulted when they beheld Mordecai garbed in royal blue. You have always been their salvation, their hope in every generation, to make known that all who place their hope in you shall not be put to shame, nor shall all those who trust in you be disgraced forever. Cursed be Haman, who sought to destroy me. Blessed be Mordecai the Jew. Cursed be Zeresh, the wife of Haman, who terrified me. Blessed be Esther, who interceded on my behalf. Cursed be all the wicked, blessed be all the righteous, and may Shavana also be remembered favorably. Again, to recap, there are 4 mitzvahs, that's commandments, of Purim, and one is to hear the Megillah, the book of Esther. And number 2 is to give to the needy. Number 3 is to send food, gifts to friends, and number 4 is to feast. And I see my counter is up. So it is saying anyway. So I'm going to pause it here and come back with the next part. And we're going to bring Purim 2020, this video, to a conclusion.